but I will be sharing some thoughts and ideas we've collected in hopes of demystifying the obligations that plan sponsors have as fiduciaries, provide you some tools and resources so you can engage in better conversations with those plan sponsors to help them meet those fiduciary obligations. But I think as we just think about this topic broadly, and just think about what comes to mind when you talk about fiduciary responsibility, what do you think most plan sponsors are thinking of? I promise you, it's probably not good things, right? So I'm going to endeavor to try and simplify this. In this modern world, it seems like everything is getting more and more complex, and I think there is a call for simplicity, right? Success requires all of us to get help from time to time, and dare I say guides. I mean, think about any work you have done at the house, right? Mechanics, doctors, heck, even ordering a cup of coffee requires a barista these days, right? So our plan today is to use our time together to provide you some tools that, again, sponsors can help cut through the complexities of their fiduciary duties. We hope to do that in such a way as not to scare folks, right? So much of the focus on fiduciary responsibility is really more about the consequences of non-compliance, right? What's at stake if you fail? Study after study tells us plan sponsors are uber concerned about fees, which I would argue is probably Latin for litigation. Certainly not true, but it feels like it, right? When you talk to plan sponsors, they're very concerned about getting sued, right? They're all the press around it. So I hope to have far less fear mongering today in our time together and more education to help help those plan sponsors become more informed and ultimately improve participant outcomes by being better fiduciaries. To do that, we're going to cover three broad topics. First, we're going to talk about ERISA. What are the basic requirements, right? The law, what does it require? Second, we'll talk about some best practices, share some best practices. Third, we'll finish with some resources, ideally to help you along the way. So let's get started with some ERISA requirements. I've already seen a couple questions come in. We are actually not taking live questions, but I will get back to each of you. We will get back to each of you with answers to your questions. So keep them coming, please. But let's start with those ERISA requirements, dating back all the way to 1974, as we know. And again, no fear mongering here, just the truth. And I want to take us forward from 1974 back to 1982. And it was a famous case, Donovan versus Beerworth, that established the fiduciary duty as the highest duty known to law. Again, no scare tactics here, just the truth. Retirement plan fiduciaries are making decisions that affect participants' retirement savings, which for many of them may very well be the largest sum of money they ever have seen. So it's very important that we remind plan sponsors serving as fiduciaries to take their roles seriously, and they need to get it right, right? So who is a fiduciary? When it comes to defined contribution plans, a fiduciary is basically anyone who exercises discretionary authority or control over plan assets, or actually gives investment advice to the plan and receives a fee, right? So common fiduciaries, you all know this, but plan sponsor, the company, plan administrator, oftentimes a committee for the plan, investment advisor, 321 or 338 investment fiduciary, plan trustees, they can be individuals, they can be banks, et cetera. We're going to focus our time and energy today really on the plan sponsor and the committee roles today. So this one's a little meaty and a little bit technical, and hopefully this is as technical as we'll get. But ERISA sections outline various fiduciary roles. The first we'll highlight is the 402A named fiduciary. That's typically the plan sponsor. The main fiduciary oversees the selection and monitoring of all the other fiduciaries, and by the way, assumes all of the plan sponsor's duties, right? The second one is the 316 plan administrator. This is typically a plan sponsor, unless, of course, they're utilizing the services of a third-party administrator, or it is a PEP, right, a pooled employer plan. They handle the day-to-day operations of the plan. Next is the 403A trustee. This is typically the owner of the company for smaller plans. They have exclusive authority and discretion to manage and control plan assets. Now, you have a 403A trustee or 403A1 directed trustee. That's typically what you'll see on larger plans. A trust company takes instructions from the fiduciary committee typically. They are a directed trustee. They hold the plan's assets, but they don't actually have the ability to control them. That, of course, comes from the fiduciary committee. And then you have the 338 investment manager, typically an RIA to the plan, exclusive authority and discretion over the selection and monitoring and firing of the investment options. 321, typically a plan advisor. They make investment recommendations to the named fiduciary, trustee for a fee, but generally does not exercise discretion or control. Again, hopefully this is as technical as we need to get today, but these roles are important and something we should be reminding plan sponsors of as we talk to them about their fiduciary responsibility. Now, this would be a great pop quiz if we were all in person, but you would all ace it, so I'm not worried about it. But what is 404A? It really is from ERISA. It defines the standards of conduct for fiduciaries under ERISA. There are three pillars, three guiding principles, if you will. The first is the exclusive benefit rule. The second is the prudent, what we'll call expert rule. And then, of course, is the third pillar, which is investment diversification. I'm going to dig into each of these in a little more detail. I'm going to warn the audience. There is a lot here, so just bear with me. It's all important, but we will get through it and get through it pretty easily. So the exclusive benefit rule is essentially a duty of loyalty. Back to that Donovan versus Beerworth, highest duty known to law, right? It requires fiduciaries to look out for the benefit, and this is important, the exclusive benefit of the participants and their beneficiaries. We've all heard stories of plan sponsors making decisions out of fear of litigation. If you're making a decision, well, we were afraid we would get sued, so we did X, Y, or Z. If you did that, then you're worried about yourself, you're worried about the company, you are not, in that case, worried about the participants, and that is a big, big deal, right? So that very well may be seen as a breach because it's self-interest by definition and not looking out for the benefit, i.e. exclusive benefit of the participants and ultimately their beneficiaries, right? We've seen instances where, we see less of it, fortunately, today, but plan sponsors would choose a specific option because they got a better deal from a banking arrangement, a loan arrangement, something like that. So all of those things create potential breaches, and we just need to remind plan sponsors that duty of loyalty is of paramount importance, right? The exclusive benefit of their participants and their beneficiaries. Now, it's important to note that not all decisions about the plan are fiduciary decisions, right? Some decisions, like whether or not to establish a plan, whether or not you're going to update or amend the plan, terminate the plan, plan features, all of these are business decisions and not fiduciary ones. When making these decisions, an employer is acting on behalf of the company, the business, and not the plan, and therefore doesn't serve as a fiduciary. Now, that's important. However, once you make that decision, once you have decided to implement these decisions, that person then is then acting on behalf of the plan and carrying out the actions may actually be a fiduciary because of that. So the prudent expert rule, now this has gone by a lot of names, but we're going with the prudent expert rule, requires fiduciaries to make decisions with care, prudence, skill, and diligence that a prudent expert would. Now, prudence here is a concept with a couple facets. First, prudent decisions require an appropriate level of knowledge, counsel, and experience, right? So you need those things in your bag in order to be prudent, right? Resources, appropriately knowledgeable associate and counsel must be sought when you don't have it. So if you don't have it, you need to find somebody that can have it. Now, as a fiduciary, part of your responsibility is to ensure that the decisions are being made by people with the appropriate background, qualifications, knowledge, expertise, etc. So again, a lot of plan sponsors get held up on this one. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't know anything about it. Some do, some don't. They learn along the way, but it's okay not to know. But it's important that if you don't know, you hire folks that do know. And that's where, of course, many of you on this call are so incredibly important, right? Now, another important element of this is making sure you're documenting everything appropriately and following that documentation. Now, we'll talk more about that shortly, probably more under best practices. than the ERISA requirements, but stay tuned. Okay. So if you are a fiduciary and you're lacking that expertise, you're going to want to hire someone, as we said, with that professional knowledge. Now, when it comes to hiring service providers, right, a named fiduciary does have an obligation here to select and monitor them prudently. So again, might be a good idea to have a process for hiring record keepers and other service providers, including the advisor to the plan, the retirement advisor to the plan, right? Now, that said, not all parties that help administer a retirement plan are fiduciaries, right? Some service providers will carry out fiduciary tasks and others won't, right? The ones that carry out fiduciary tasks have fiduciary liability, others won't, right? Fiduciary status really depends on the roles and responsibilities, the actions being taken by the particular arrangement. So common non-fiduciary service providers include the record keeper, third-party administrator, and sometimes the plan advisor, as we talked about. So when hiring these non-fiduciary service providers, the standard of prudence does apply, right? So you have to have a standard of prudence just so you don't get any backwash from that decision, right? So standard of prudence applies. It's important to get it right. So let's think about this is when you hire service providers. I've heard this before. We'll take all the responsibility. It's just not true. I know you know that service providers can and do take on fiduciary responsibility. That is true. They can absolutely lessen the fiduciary burden, but it never ever goes away. It never ever goes away. But as fiduciaries who fail to meet their responsibilities when selecting and monitoring service providers could end up being liable for any of the failings of their hired providers, right? So this is important. And I think too many plan sponsors are under the misguided belief that if they hire someone acting as a fiduciary, then they're off the hook. And that is not true. When you delegate fiduciary duties, you do not abdicate your fiduciary responsibility, right? We can never abdicate that away. We can get a lot of help and support, but it never goes away. And that's important. So we dedicated a whole slide to this one sentence. And I know it seems silly, but this is a very common misconception out there. So this is our first asterisk. We have a few asterisks through this presentation, a couple things that make sense but didn't really fit anywhere. And this is one of cybersecurity is seemingly in the news each and every day. January, we saw the mother of all data breaches in which 26 billion, that's B as in big, 26 billion records were leaked from popular websites such as LinkedIn, X, and Dropbox, right? At the same time, ChatGPT started leaking personal data from private chats, including passwords, right? So we're seeing this all the time. And it's not just here in this country, it is a global problem. And companies are spending literally billions of dollars on this. It was estimated that last year in 2023, some $222 billion was spent in order to help solve for this and protect against this. Now, the Department of Labor has posted some resources to help. They have a tip sheet for plan sponsors. They've even gone as far as to offer a tip sheet for plan sponsors to share with their participants about how they can do a better job of protecting their data. So don't make the mistake of not talking about this. This is an important topic for our industry, literally for virtually every industry out there. And we need to make sure it's on plan sponsors' radar and should be something they are asking about when interviewing service providers. Now, this is kind of our next asterisk, if you will, the pooled employer plan, PEPs. Thanks to Secure 2.0, PEPs are now here and can make retirement plans more accessible and help reduce plan sponsor fiduciary responsibility. Now, again, I'm going to remind you, reduce, not eliminate. You cannot eliminate plan sponsor fiduciary responsibility or liability, but you can reduce it. You can help manage it, and PEPs can absolutely do that. The PEP is sponsored by a pooled plan provider, a PPP, who is the named fiduciary and has 336 administrative and 338 investment management services built in, right? It's a bundled package. Plan sponsors are still responsible, once again, for selecting the PPP, no different than any other service providers. They have ongoing responsibility to monitor that as well. Now, what about fees? We talk about fees all the time. Clearly, fees are important. I represent Capital Group American Funds. We talk every day about the importance of fees. But some folks would argue fees are the only thing, and I would respectfully push back and suggest they are not the only thing. My dad used to say, son, you can have your own opinions, but you cannot have your own facts. I think sometimes people are confusing their opinions with facts. And lowest cost, to be clear, does not provide any type of safe harbor, right? It's important to remind plan sponsors of that. Again, plan sponsors are always talking about fees, fees, fees. Fees are important. They're incredibly important, but they are not the only important thing. The Department of Labor has given us guidance on fees as it relates to prudence. Goes all the way back to February of 2012 with a 408B2 disclosure. You'll remember that was a 109-page document. And in that 109-page document, they used the word reasonable or reasonableness 53 times. They used the words lowest cost or cheapest 0 times. 0 times. So I think it's important that we help plan sponsors understand this. The courts have kind of backed this up. It's not just about fees. We've got to do more than that. And low fees, once again, will not serve as a safe harbor. When it comes to fees, it's all about reasonable, 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 53 times. Now, to be clear, they never defined reasonable, right? But it's important that we lean in towards that. So let's take a look. When you think about fees, I think it's important to look at all of the fees individually and then in total, right? So here's a tool we have that looks at fees individually, but it also looks at it collectively. Now, in this example, I just want to highlight for you, you'll notice that the record keeping expenses for A, we're going to call it a passive provider, are 4 times that of B, an active provider. Now, that does not by itself, in and of itself, cause a problem. It's okay to pay more as long as they're reasonable and as long as you're getting value for that. So the question is, you must assure you are getting value for that difference and those costs are reasonable. Now, the same is true for the investment in this simple example. The investment costs of B, the active, are more expensive than the investment costs of A, the passive solution. Again, no problem in and of itself to pay more. You just need to make sure, once again, that the costs are reasonable in doing that, and you're actually getting more for paying more, right? I like the phrase excess returns net of fees. So let's dig into that a little bit more with another example. Now, in this example, we're going to show a 25-year-old participant investing in their plan for 40 years, and then highlight the difference of a half a basis point, 0.5%, or 1% excess return. I'm sorry, 0.5%, 0.5%, or 1% excess return net of fees over their career. And then we're going to flip the lens and look at it through the lens of retirement. So again, 40 years of accumulation. We affectionately call this the shark fin. As you look at it, hopefully you see why. It shows that 50 basis points or 0.5% excess return net of fees over 40 years of accumulation, which turns into more than $119,000 of nest egg improvement, right? That is meaningful difference, right? $119,000 more nest egg at retirement. Now, heaven forbid you're able to get 100 basis points or 1% excess return net of fees. That equates to more than $256,000 more nest egg at retirement. Those in and of themselves are life-changing numbers for most Americans. But as our audience knows, it is not enough to retire with dignity. We need to make sure and maintain that dignity throughout our retirement. So to do that, when you look at it through the lens of retirement, again, that 0.5% excess return net of fees could provide an additional 5 years of excess retirement income. That 1% excess return net of fees throughout retirement could provide an additional 16 years of retirement income. Now think about that through the lens of retirement. What does it mean to get another 16 years of retirement income before you have to go back to work, before you have to spend less or knock on the door and ask for help, right? My dad used to say small hinges swing big doors, meaning little differences add up to big differences over time. I think these results are life-changing for the typical participant. So yes, fees matter, but it's the total fees, and it's important to recognize what you're getting for those fees. So if you can get excess return net of fees, it could be a very good thing for plan sponsors. Now, there are some implications to how fees are paid and the effect as it relates to fiduciary. So this is really important. As we've discussed, ERISA requires fiduciaries to ensure that participants pay no more than reasonable fees. Again, they don't define it, but reasonable fees. Now, under ERISA, only certain expenses may be paid for from plan assets. And it's very important to note that the decision on whether or not to pay a given expense from plan assets is a fiduciary decision, right? That decision in and of itself is a fiduciary act. So we got to get this right. A variety of expenses may be paid from the plan, include administrative costs, plan expenses, TPA fees, investment management fees, record keeping service fees, however, expenses that a plan sponsor incurs while making business decisions around the plan. Those are known as settler expenses, SETTLOR, settler expenses, and cannot be paid from plan assets. These are typically things related to, again, the choices, the business decisions the plan sponsor makes in establishing and designing or in terminating the plan, right? Plan sponsors who choose to pay plan expenses, approved plan expenses from participant accounts will need to prudently determine the method for allocating the expenses amongst those participant accounts. And I know there's been a fair amount of angst over that with the differences in sub-TA fees and share class expense differences, right? So that brings us to this kind of last idea of diversification. And we have heard this from our parents and our grandparents. At one point or another, all of us have heard this, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. The Department of Labor told us the same thing in 1974. With today's plan investment menus, we see less risk here than we used to, but it is still a fiduciary mandate, right? If you utilize a 404C safe harbor provision, you can relieve liability of losses of on participant directed investment decisions. But you have to follow a few rules, right? Now, again, that's a very specific carve out there, right? You need to notify the participants that you're complying with 404C. You need to offer at least 3 materially different investments, simple, think stocks, bonds, and cash. And you need to provide enough information about those different investments for participants to make informed decisions. Now, on a personal note, many of you know I'm kind of into behavioral finance, right? And as I think about this topic, while it doesn't necessarily have any fiduciary ramifications, I think it's important. Behavioral finance tells us that too much choice can be a bad thing. 3 separate distinct options is the bare minimum. 21 is the average, according to Plan Sponsor Council of America's latest survey. What's the right number? I don't know, but I just caution us all, behavioral finance hat here, not fiduciary hat. Please be thoughtful in your investment lineups, right? Be careful about having too many choices. Too many choices can overwhelm participants and make them freeze up and do nothing, right? That's the last thing we want. So if you think about the largest plan in the country, it's the FERS, the Federal Employee Retirement Savings System, has just 5 funds in a target date series, right? I saw one with 477 different options plus target dates. We really need to help plan sponsors simplify their menus to improve the likelihood that participants will do better. Less can indeed be more. But again, if you're offering 404C safe harbor, we got to notify the participants. We have to offer at least three materially different investments, stocks, bonds, and cash. We need to provide enough information for education for participants to make informed decisions. So we come to our final asterisk of the day, and this is on brokerage windows and company stock. Brokerage windows allow participants the ability to invest in a very large selection of different investments. It sounds good. Again, behavioral finance aside, less may be more, right? There is a significant amount of uncertainty around fiduciary responsibility in brokerage windows, right? With all that flexibility, are you setting yourself up for some friction and trouble down the road? There's some thoughts that might suggest you are, right? There is very little guidance in this area, unfortunately, from the Department of Labor, but they did recently suggest fiduciary responsibility could apply to cryptocurrency, interestingly enough, and related products made available through a brokerage window. So it wasn't the brokerage window itself, but some of the options available in that brokerage window. So you got to be very thoughtful. If you're going to open it up, is it open to everything? Can you minimize the options it's available to? Are all those options appropriate for the individuals in your plan? The list is long and a little bit squirrely, so just be mindful. One of those things you're really going to want to think about. Now, company stock is another one of those investment options that raises a unique set of issues and risks, including diversification risk. If you offer that, is that offer? Are there enough other options out there that could provide diversification? What about monitoring? What if the stock is not doing well? Do you have to exclude it from the plan, right? Potential conflicts of interest are another big one. And, as a fiduciary, you have the exclusive benefit rule. You're supposed to look out for the exclusive benefit of the participants and their beneficiaries. So if you have company stock and you happen to be a senior leader on the company and the company stock is going to go up or down, but you have an obligation as a manager, senior leader of the company not to share that. That is non-public information. But you're on the fiduciary committee of the plan. That's a little bit of a conflict there, right? Because as a fiduciary, the highest duty known to law, you have an obligation to the plan participants to say, hey, this stock's going to go down. Maybe we should get it out of the plan. This stock's going to go up. Maybe we should, that kind of stuff. So all sorts of question marks around that. We need to be really thoughtful. And by the way, there are potentially additional costs in brokerage windows and company stock administration. So we're going to have to take all that into consideration as well. And offering employee stock may increase the risk of litigation. We have seen that. So just be aware. Again, not that you can't do these things. It's just one of those things you're going to want to have thoughtful conversations with the plan sponsors about. So now that we've talked about what ERISA requires, let's dive into this idea of best practices. And I want to be really clear here. These are best practices and not required by ERISA, right? So these are, while they're not requirements, I'm going to ask you to think about what you put in writing, policy statements, right? So ERISA does not require us to have them, but if you're ever audited, they ask for all of this stuff in writing, so it helps to have it. And if you're going to have it, there's some thoughts we have around policy statements that we'd like you to think about. I call it policy statement hygiene, but think about your investment policy statement, your education policy statement, your cybersecurity policy statement, your record keeper search policy statement, your financial professional search. All of those things, when properly drafted, can go a long way in helping meet fiduciary duties, right? Like that's a good thing. But we need to be very thoughtful about what we put in writing. A lot of these things are too prescriptive or too restrictive. We cannot be too prescriptive or too restrictive. I encourage us to use thoughtful language, right? Flexible language. We need to keep them updated. I had a situation, I was talking to a plan sponsor in a meeting about one of the provisions in their investment policy statement, like where did that come from? Oh, I don't know. I think that was Bob's idea. Well, where's Bob? Oh, Bob retired 5 years ago. The document was 5 years old, had not been updated at least in that long, and his name was still on the signature line. So you got to keep them updated, right? And it's important, whatever we put in writing, the most important thing is we got to follow it, right? Whatever it is, we got to follow it, because that is what the plaintiff's bar might call documented evidence that could be used in a court of law. So let's be clear, be thoughtful about what we put in writing, use flexible language, don't be too prescriptive, don't be too restrictive, update them regularly. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And importantly, follow them, right? Now, what about participant communications? This is incredibly important, a huge obligation for fiduciaries to educate their participants on the plan so that the participants can make informed decisions. Remember the duty, right? Our duty is to them, so we got to get it right. Written notices may very well satisfy the requirement, but probably aren't enough, right? So we need to do more. Again, ERISA doesn't require us to do more. If you just check the box and do the written requirements, which a lot of record keepers and other service providers can help with, that checks the box, yes. But does it really create a greater likelihood of success? Does it make sure they're adequately informed and educated? Probably not, right? So maybe we could do more. The more engaged the plan sponsor, the more engaged the participant, and dare I say, the more engaged you, the advisor, are, the better the likelihood of success, the greater the likelihood of ultimately improving participant outcomes. So education programs, while not required, can go a long, long way in helping participants and improving the chance of success for them, right? Now, when we are better stewards as fiduciaries of participants, right? And thinking about their retirement outcomes, I think the more everyone wins, right? The happier the plan participant, the happier the employee, the better they are at work as a rule of thumb, the less stressed they are at work. Like all of those things create a greater likelihood for the company as well. So it is really doing well by doing well for others, right? So it's a pretty cool thing. Now, there is a note on missing participants. This has become, it's always been a big deal for the Department of Labor, but it continues to be a big deal. More and more employees are leaving the company, but keeping their money in the plans. And as fiduciaries, we're still responsible for them because they're in the plan, whether they're an employee or not, right? So a couple best practices: collect and maintain a list with personal emails and personal cell phone numbers. Can go a long, long way. Now, if you may recall, one of the provisions of Secure 2.0 was this idea of building a new national database to help with this. I heard they did get a little bit of money for this. It's supposed to be ready by year end. Let me just say, we will see. We will see. So now, depending on the size of a plan, you may want to think about a committee. We've mentioned committees a couple of times. Committee of decision makers may be helpful in fulfilling your duty of prudence. So it's not all on one or two people, right? And when forming plan committees, here are a few things you may want to encourage them to think about and keep in mind, right? Find members who will be engaged. Remember that what I said on the last slide: the more engaged the sponsor, the more engaged the participant, the more engaged we are, the greater the likelihood for success. So when it comes to committee members, you want to find those that are willing to be engaged, willing to take their responsibility seriously. Back to highest duty known to law, Donovan versus Beerworth in 1982. They got to take it seriously. Second, determine what role each committee member will play, right? An ideal committee would be made up of members who bring some level of knowledge, whether it's investments, plan design, ERISA. That's ideal. We don't see that very often, which is where training and education, which we'll talk about in a minute. And by the way, if they're not experts, what do we need to do? We need to hire experts, right? Consider having individuals from different parts of your organization with different voices, different expertises, representing different work groups, if you can, right? Most important thing is that they be educated and willing to take their responsibility seriously, being engaged, right? But you also need to be mindful of any conflicts of interest. We talked about that, what happens when you have senior leadership and they know stuff. So you need to be thoughtful of that, because conflicts of interest could jeopardize or appear to jeopardize the committee's ability to make the best decisions for the exclusive benefit of the participants, right? Now, there are a couple of committee roles you may want to consider. Obviously, a chairperson, a facilitator, and then a secretary or a recorder, right? Someone to keep the minutes. And speaking of, let's talk about what the committee puts out, right? A committee charter is certainly a best practice. It can help committees run smoothly or more smoothly. May help fiduciaries avoid some litigation and penalties down the road. A committee charter typically describes what the committee's scope of authority is, sets forth roles and responsibilities, may even list out who the folks on the committee are and what their roles are. But I remind you, whatever you put in writing is binding, right? So we need to be very careful what we put in writing. Consider building flexibility in for the unexpected. I'll take us back to the great pandemic, with COVID. A lot of plan documents said they were going to meet quarterly. Well, with COVID, people weren't meeting in person quarterly. A lot of folks, certainly in the early years, didn't have the ability to do the video meetings like we are today. So they said they were meeting quarterly, but they didn't. So by definition, that is a breach. Now, could they explain it away? Could they've gotten? I'm not here to judge the merits of that. I just want to remind everyone, flexibility of language is incredibly important, right? So consider building that flexibility in with all the language to the extent possible, right? Now, when you maintain a fiduciary file, it's important you want to contain all the plan documents, all the meeting minutes, all of those things, all in one place, because if the plan is ever audited, if it ever ends up in litigation, these are the things that will be asked for, right? And by the way, any complaints to the plan, you should have a complaint file and have that in that bigger fiduciary file as well. Now, periodically, you're going to want to review the charter, certainly consider the phrase as needed, right? Periodically review or as needed. What does that mean? If something changes, if there's a change in legislation, right, that comes out that you need to make people aware of, you need to meet, even though it's not quarter end, right? Maybe you need to meet. Maybe you need to update the charter because someone is retired. So you got to think about these things and update regularly or as needed. Now, meeting minutes, I talked about them, but they should be formally approved by the committee and retained. Be very, 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 very purposeful in who you have take the minutes and be thoughtful about what they capture, right? Remember that they are planned documents and as such admissible in a court of law, right? I've heard stories of they have, a receptionist come in and take the meeting minutes. The receptionist knows nothing about the plan, just knows that management asked them to come in and take notes. So what do they write down? They write down everything. Everything may not be what you want written down. I'll leave it at that. Okay. So let's spend a couple minutes on training, right? It's great to have a committee. It's great to have a charter. It's great to have all this stuff laid out and organized. But in order for fiduciaries to really understand, in order for the committee to really understand what it means to be a fiduciary, not just their liability, but their responsibility, the roles and all of that kind of stuff, training can go a long, long way in helping them with that, right? They will need to understand the plan documents so that they may be followed. They will need to make sure they are indeed doing what is in the best interest, the exclusive benefit of those participants, but they need training on how to do that. And we think training is probably the single best way to do that, right? There's some organizations out there doing that, something you can do, something we would be honored to help you do. This presentation as an example, right? But please help plan sponsors commit to regular training for committee members. It is not a one and done thing. It should be at least annual. And maybe quarterly, a portion of meetings can be dedicated to training on a topic as an example, right? This will allow you to keep fiduciaries not only up to date on any regulatory changes that may arise, but just kind of up to date on their ongoing education and quest for education around their roles and responsibilities as a fiduciary. There are a lot of resources to help with this. We have some, basically any of the partners you have will likely have some. But that brings us to our last topic, which is this idea of resources, right? We want to direct you to some resources that can help you help plan sponsors fulfill their fiduciary roles and responsibilities and the obligations they have to the plan and the participant. Now, if you haven't done so already, please, please, please take out your cell phone and scan this QR code. Now, while fiduciary duties are ultimately the responsibility of the plan sponsor, they are not alone. Neither are you, right? We are here to help and we would be honored to do so. So there is an abundance of resources, as I've mentioned, available to you and plan sponsors, checklists, tip sheets, training courses, and we've created a repository of those resources. Some are from us, many are not, right? Many are not. Some are from industry organizations, some are from our contemporaries in the marketplace, and some are from the government, right? But again, pull out your phone, zoom in on this QR code. It will take you to our fiduciary resources microsite. Very excited about this. And as always, one of your greatest resources is your American Funds team, who's just a phone call away. So we can always help you, point you in the right direction for some specific questions. As I mentioned, while we're not taking questions today, we will get back to you with answers to the questions you submitted. So please, please, please be thoughtful about that. Now, I mentioned this presentation. If you'd like your local representative to come in and do this presentation with you to a group of plan sponsors, we would be honored to do so. So let me give you some key takeaways here, a recap of what we've covered that you can use as a guide and kind of reviewing fiduciary duties with plan sponsors, right? So first and foremost, fiduciaries must follow the exclusive benefit rule. Everything else flows from that. The exclusive benefit rule, Donovan versus Beerwood, 1982, the highest duty known to law, right? That duty of care, right? Next, follow the prudent expert rule and exercise prudence when it comes to plan decisions, when it comes to service providers. You're not a prudent expert. What do you need to do? You need to hire one. You need to be prudent when you do it, though, right? You need to make sure that all plan fees are reasonable, 53 times reasonable, not lowest cost, not cheapest, reasonable. And remember, that doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest, right? So we have to remind them of that. Monitor service providers. We can't forget that all their activities, the policies, the information security, all that kind of stuff, while they're the ones doing it, as a fiduciary, we're responsible for monitoring what they're doing, making sure they are prudent in what they're doing. Maintain plan records, best practice, right? Best practice, maintain plan records, activities, policy statements, information security, all that kind of stuff. But whatever you document, remember, you must update regularly and you must follow. Conduct periodic reviews and benchmarking, plan documents, as well as investments, committee members, service providers, all of those kind of things you're going to want to, review periodically or as needed. Great phraseology. Communicate with plan participants. Make sure they receive sufficient education about the plan options, about the plan itself, so they can make well-informed decisions and consider best practices such as those investment policy statements and committees. So we've covered a lot of ground. Let me go into my ask. If you take nothing else from this presentation, remember to help plan sponsors serving as fiduciaries. Remember that everything they do as a fiduciary, they must do for the exclusive benefit of the participants and their beneficiaries. Secondly, I would encourage you to remember the importance of plan documents, and they serve as a guide for all actions. And last, keep in mind the aspect of fiduciary responsibility is getting help when you need it, right? And we can't say this enough. If you are stuck in your role, you feel like we can help you. If we can help you with any follow-up questions, if we can help you with any of your plan sponsors, please, please, please reach out to your local American Funds team. We care about improving participant outcomes, and we are here to help. And I'll leave you with these two words, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Leah. And the two words are simply this: thank you. What you do matters. You are changing people's lives, one plan sponsor, one participant at a time. You won't hear it from our friends in Washington. You won't hear it from our friends in the media. And unfortunately, you probably don't hear it enough from your clients. So on behalf of all my colleagues across Capital Group American Funds, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for the noble work you do in improving participant outcomes. I've said it several times. I will leave you with this. If there is anything we can do to be of service to you, please, please, please just pick up the phone, reach out to us, and let us know what we can do to help.